In a new world where most watch brands are recognized primarily by their sports models, it begs the question, how much has the watch industry's identity changed? Demand today for the average consumer seems focused on a very specific area. So creatively speaking, it can be seen as both a gift and a curse. On one side, the demand is for a certain aesthetic. This means that the design direction is easier to pinpoint and people would be more interested and likely to buy into a watch that suits their desires. On the other side, creatively, it's limiting. There is less room for experimentation, especially if watches have to fall into themes of certain color palettes, certain functions. Anyway, when we observe the Rolex brand, it is one that is defined by its sports watches. Notice that I didn't say professional watches. The sports watch, examples like the Datejust, Day Dates and Oyster Perpetuals, even reaching as far as models like the Skydweller, they aren't seen as the parentheses popular watches by most in the group of new, upcoming, aspiring Rolex professional collectors and hoarders, but as far as pieces that are able to define the brand, represent the core pillars of design that helped firmly cement the name during the 20th century, there are few that do it better. The ever-present status of the Oyster Perpetual case, then, is a statement in itself. Why, then, could the Oyster Perpetual be your only Rolex? And now more than ever, could the Oyster Perpetual be a watch that you should consider over the professionals? 2020 has been quite a year for the Oyster Perpetual, to our surprise. This write-up has been months in the making and began a long time before the releases. The aim was to focus on why you should pay more attention to them, but it seems like Rolex had the idea before me. And many would agree they have managed to breathe new life and fun into the line. I was approached by Chrono24, and after a few talks decided to base this video not only around the recent examples, but also the past examples. How could we work together on this? As most of us know, Chrono24 is one of the most reliable and trusted marketplaces for luxury watches. And at this moment in time, there are over 3,000 active listings for the Oyster Perpetual line. Most of us know by now that their database is massive, and it is one of, if not the best, online resources when it comes to searching for virtually any watch reference on the market. So not only can this video focus on the Perpetuals, their history, designs, but also act as an area to link the Chrono24 marketplace to you, as well as focus on where exactly the demand for them is in the world. How have the newer models impacted the old, and are the old becoming more in demand? Treat this video then as a resource and everything you need to know about the OP line as we currently see them. It is no surprise that a brand's image can evolve over time, that its origins were lost to time in favor of what became popular or assigned to the brand. We see it in all industries, but it takes a certain something for a company to still produce what they were best known for. In many ways, it's an assertion of quality, an assurance that their originals are just as good as their more advanced pieces. And the use of these first examples as a solid foundation shows us how the brand has evolved. In past videos, I've been asked questions about the Rolex Datejust, whether its design can be seen as obsolete next to the more modern approaches taken by the new and shiny professionals. The short answer is that, though some aspects like the fluted bezels, maybe some color choices, haven't aged so gracefully in this area, the history behind the watch and what made it so famous will never be outclassed. Where the Datejust introduced the rotating date window, the Oyster Perpetual, as the name suggests, was Rolex's first efforts in creating a fully automatic watch that was self-winding, hence perpetual movement, and housing it in an oyster case designed to be waterproof, inspired by the clamshell with organic forms and a more natural look next to its competitors at the time. Think about it. 1926, Rolex creates the first waterproof watch. There's some debate about those claims and how they owned the patents instead of coming up with the idea themselves, but hey, the technology that went into creating an hermetically sealed case was so advanced and ahead of what other manufacturers were trying to do. In 1931, they produced the Perpetual Movement, also one of the first of its kind. Seeing this together in a modern watch, yes, quite uninspiring, and many of us now, because technology has evolved so much since then, we take waterproof watches with automatic movements for granted today. But think of the impact that these two features have made. These proprietary technologies are the two aspects that have shaped the world of watchmaking for almost 100 years. So the Oyster Perpetual has been around for a long time. Call it an entry-level watch in the line, but it could also be seen as a gold standard. Many of these references use base calibers that we find in more expensive models too, like the Explorer and the Submariner line. So you are getting a watch for a better price in this category that uses the same movement. They are also some of the most affordable in this rarefied category, and if you're lucky, you can find them easily on the grey market. Some might have felt that the earlier models, the ones that were around before the new releases this year, were too plain, boring, didn't have much life in them, but I disagree. If we know anything about the age of a watch and its design, monotone, simpler colors will always stand the test of time better. If we are to look beyond the stereotypical archetypes of the sports watch, like the diver, GMT, chronograph, without the original Oyster Perpetual, we wouldn't have any of these. And this is pertinent. They do in fact represent the true identity that helped establish Rolex as a brand. Without them, we wouldn't see what the brand has become since. In a way, the size, their presence on the wrist, even the colors are irrelevant next to what they actually stand for. A classic, simple and understated watch with a coronet at the 12. That is what the brand has always been. The essence of good design being as little design as possible. If you can take anything away from this video, I think it is so important to emphasize how well the Oyster Perpetual represents the Rolex brand. How before, it was just seen as another watch, but now, we could say that it is viewed quite differently. The first watch in this category, one of the smallest, we could say the least popular, but also one of the most underrated. There have been a few opportunities where I have almost pulled the trigger on one myself. The 34mm Oyster Perpetual 114-200. Why is this one more engaging than most? The reasoning? The dial variations and the arrangement of batons. Interesting to note that the earlier models in the pre-2020 category experimented a lot with combinations of colors. Most were radially brushed arrangements with spot colors. Some found them repulsive and others enjoyed the pairing. Notable examples like the champagne dial and blue accents around the batons, olive green with orange accents, and grape with a touch of red. They all have this air of elegance to them while remaining small and understated. The use of these darker tones gave the dials a different character. More than the colors, the best models in this series, in my opinion, is the black and white dial variants. Why? Well, here we get to experience a watch that looks very true to its heritage. You could swear that this model was made back in the 1950s, or even before. Classic, understated, well designed. Observe the baton arrangement on these models. They look plain, until you see that the quarters are slightly larger and longer. An excellent amount of balance, and one of the most prominent traits of these variants. I am willing to bet that if this became the standard layout that we saw with the larger sizes, the modern OP might have evolved very differently. And of all the modern formats we've seen out of the Oyster Perpetual, the subtlety of the extended batons completes the arrangement so much more. Of course, the 34mm size is the issue for most. It's too small. Bear in mind that the white dial watch always visually looks bigger on the wrist, and the way that the cases have been shaped, more squat and squared off, you could easily mistake this reference as a 36mm variant at a glance. Keep in mind that this reference is also shared with the Air King, so you do find mixing and matching with different dial combinations here. To the reference 116000, the 36mm Oyster Perpetual is the true classic, the size being unisex, the idyllic format for the sports watch throughout the 60s to the 90s. Judging by how they have been situated, is the model that in many ways became the base of inspiration for the new 2020 models. And in this area, we see the introduction of the highly popular silver and rhodium dials. Also notice that we do not see extended batons at the quarters. Instead, the double-stacked batons become popular, as well as others that favor singles. Some variants arrive with the Explorer-esque 369 Arabics at the quarters too, under the Oyster Perpetual name. A very cost-effective way to get yourself into the Explorer design territory. Then there are others with roulette-style, almost Flieger-inspired formats. As we can see, these watches are all over the place in this category, with no clear design direction. One side says that there is so much variety to choose from, while the other, we could argue, shows that there is no congruence. And this may have been a contributing factor as to why the Oyster Perpetual line was overlooked in this area by so many. Also the sizes. The majority still feel that 36mm is too small a size for a male wrist. I'd argue that the 36mm form lets you see how the bracelet and case can complement one another. With this size, elegance and subtlety go hand in hand. The reference 114-300, the 39s, some of the most appropriately sized, appreciated and sought after in this category. This watch was, and I regrettably say was, an example that showed us what modern Rolex was capable of doing when sizing the Oyster Perpetual appropriately. A superb unisex option that rides the line of being a modern suited sports watch. Along with the rhodium dial and the blue variants, the black and white dials are still, we could say, the most in-demand entry-level models on the market today. And it has to do with their sizes more than anything else. The balanced use of the dial architecture is flawless. And where this 39 succeeds over the modern Explorer 39 is that it uses a domed bezel, which warps the light and surroundings around the dial, making it wear smaller in size while also feeling more compact. It is hard to complain about these models. The only issue when it comes to reading the time, having the same sized batons around the dial and typical Oyster hands, might make the reading experience difficult. And we should all spare a thought for those who were on the waiting lists for these when they were discontinued. Removing these models from the catalogue was a mistake. Within the pre-2020 Oyster Perpetual line, we see many options. Too many, we could argue. Dividing up the two categories, we see some that are more adventurous with their color choices and others that are restrained, more timeless in their approach. And then the newcomers arrived. Their design and color revamp definitely did bring a lot more attention to the line, and we could say that they were the standouts of the unveiling. This is because the professionals are virtually impossible to get, and the OPs, though entry-level, now have an X factor to them that other pieces in the Rolex line don't. They make for great additions to collections because they go against the grain and the typical restraint we see from the brand. Why was this done, we have to ask ourselves. Were these bright spot colors chosen for the purpose of wow factor? Made to bring in a new generation of audiences, appealing to their love of bright products like the Apple Watch, the iPhone lines. A last-ditch effort to bring life to the conservative foundations of the OP. An answer that we are now living in an age where people enjoy the idea of accessorizing their watches with colorful strap options. The brighter, the better. That, it may be, a fashionable sign of the times. Was it Rolex's way of conceding to other manufacturers who have been dabbling in this area for far longer? Hard to pinpoint. Ultimately, what these new options have been able to do was eliminate the fluff, tighten up what the Oyster Perpetual represents to a modern audience with some form of unifying design identity. Not everyone is going to love them, but at least they are easy to recognize now. The colors are taken from a few palettes, a surprising change, and we could argue that they go against what Rolex is known for in this area, unless we're referring back to the stellar and stone dials of the past. Some are more neutral and less effervescent, others are bright, exuberant, expressive, and all the other adjectives you can think of. In this area, the hot topic is the reference 124-300, now in a newly sized 41mm case instead of the previous 39. The attention towards these has been ballistic. They are waiting lists. They are selling for ridiculous premiums on the grey market, and the most desirables are the racing green, burnt yellow, Tiffany blue, coral red. It feels in a way that where the earlier, more restrained models have this presence of being subtle, more in line with the understatedness of the Rolex identity, the newer pieces have more of an accessory feel to them, made to attract attention. The styling of the double batons at the quarters. This, next to the size increase, is another point of contention worth addressing. The positives do outweigh the negatives, and it's a style that does grow on you. They look distinctly more modern in presentation. The doubles help divide your eye away from the uniformity of the single batons moving around the dial, making the watch easier to read at a glance. But critically, when dealing now with a larger dial size, increased architecture, the batons close up the vacant negative space and add more heaviness. The watch doesn't feel as empty, and that is always a good thing. Looking at the finer print and the data provided to me by Chrono24, these are the top sellers of 2020. The top spot, no surprises, goes to the 39mm 114-300. Next, the 36mm 116-000, and third, the latest 41mm 124-300. Compared to the year before, where the first two were in the same positions, over the course of this year, basically 3 months in the final quarter, we see just how much movement there has been with these new models. Both the 41 and the 36 are the top 4 sellers on Chrono24. Now, whether that is just an initial spike from the hype surrounding them or something more substantial, I'm leaning towards the latter. Not only have these new colors created a lot of intrigue, but the interest in them is going to remain for a long time. Since the official releases of the new models, they have worked their way up to the top 5. And as far as where they have been sold in the world, first is Germany, then USA, then France, the United Kingdom, and Italy. Interestingly, the top 5 color choices between the models, silver tops the list, then blue, black, white, and grey, or rhodium. The beauty of these new releases means that the attention has once again returned to the Oyster Perpetual. Naturally, the attention has moved everywhere, not only to the new models but also the past choices. And there is a lot to take away from this line. I have always felt that they are underappreciated, so it's good to see that they are finally getting some attention. I'd like to thank Chrono24 for this partnership opportunity. To make your lives easier, I have provided links in the description of this video to all the references mentioned for you to browse, as well as a link to their new YouTube channel. I have found it fascinating studying up and seeing where the interest lies with these pieces. How there is almost a divide amongst us in the community who chooses the more restrained over the energetic models and vice versa. How the debate between the 39 and the 41mm models will continue, and whether or not moving the sizes further up was a good decision. With the new releases and all the hype that comes with them, one side shows us that Rolex is maybe becoming more creatively inclined, adventurous and open to new opportunities and avenues, but at what cost? Could we see this as a change in their identity when it comes to future models? Of course, they are not going to please everyone. Yes, they are off the beaten track, but will they stand the test of time? Could these be chosen as your first, possibly your only Rolex, or are they too flamboyant? Do they serve better as supplementary watches to add to a collection? I would be very interested in knowing your thoughts in this area, where your preferences lie when looking at the many models we've been through. Regardless, for a brand to do something different, go against the grain and make a success story out of it, that is the essence of creative endeavors. And it needs to be made clear again just how much the Oyster Perpetual represents the brand. Beyond the use of super cases, bezels, and complications, stripped down to its basic organic function of telling time, with nothing but batons on the dial and a crown at the 12, that is the true identity. And seeing just how it has been taken forward into this next decade leaves a lot of opportunity open for its future.